The bridge of the Phoenix Rising shook as another energy blast hit the shields. Admiral Kate Morrison gripped her command chair and watched the tactical display. Red dots filled the screen like angry stars. 500 enemy ships surrounded them. Her own fleet showed only 43 green dots. The numbers told the whole story. Humanity was about to die. "Admiral, shields are at 30%, called Lieutenant Alex Thompson from his station. His voice stayed steady, but Morrison could see his hands shake as he worked. Good training kept him calm, but fear lived in his eyes. Morrison looked at the main screen. The Zethkari ships moved in perfect formation. Their crystal hulls caught the light from nearby stars and threw it back like broken mirrors. Beautiful and deadly. For 300 years, these beings had crushed every human world they found. Now only Earth remained, and soon that would be gone too. "Captain Davis, report from the other ships," Morrison ordered. Ryan Davis checked his tablet. His face was grim. "The Constitution lost main power. The Liberty is down to half crew. The Defiance can barely hold position." He paused. "Admiral, we have maybe 6 hours before they break through our lines completely." 6 hours. Morrison closed her eyes for a moment. Behind her eyelids, she could see Earth. Blue oceans. White clouds. Cities full of people who trusted her to keep them safe. 8 billion souls who would die if she failed. A door hissed open. Behind her, Dr. Lucas Grant walked onto the bridge. The old scientist looked tired. His gray hair was messy, and his lab coat had stains on it. But his eyes burned with something that might have been hope. "Admiral, I need to speak with you. Now. In private." Morrison looked at him. Grant was brilliant, but he was also the kind of man who chased wild ideas. Right now she needed practical solutions, not theories. "Doctor, unless you have a way to make 43 ships beat 500, I don't have time for—" "I do," Grant said quietly. The bridge went silent. Every officer turned to look at the scientist. Morrison felt her heart. "Skip a beat. What did you say?" Grant pulled out a data pad. His fingers moved across the screen, bringing up images of ancient stone tablets covered in strange symbols. "Admiral, 3 months ago my team found ruins on Kepler 442b. We thought they were just another dead civilization. We were wrong." Morrison stood up and walked to Grant. The images on his pad showed writing unlike anything she had ever seen. The symbols seemed to move when she looked at them, twisting and changing shape. "The beings who built these ruins called themselves the Architects," Grant continued. "They claimed to be the oldest race in the galaxy, older than the Zethkari, older than us, maybe older than the stars themselves. Doctor, this is interesting, but how does it help us now?" Grant's finger moved to another image. This one showed a carving of terrible shapes fighting among the stars. The Architects wrote about a war. Not just any war. A war that almost destroyed everything that exists. They called it the Reality War. Captain Davis stepped closer. Reality War? The Architects fought against beings they called the Forgotten Ones. Creatures so powerful they could unmake planets, with a thought. Beings that fed on chaos and grew stronger as order collapsed around them. Grant's voice dropped to a whisper. The Architects won, but barely. They had to join with every other race in the galaxy to stop the Forgotten Ones. Morrison felt cold. What happened to these Forgotten Ones? They were sealed away, locked in a prison between dimensions where they couldn't hurt anyone. Grant touched the screen again. More symbols appeared. But the Architects left instructions, a way to call them back if the need was great enough. The bridge was so quiet, Morrison could hear her own heartbeat. Outside, the Zethkari fleet moved closer to Earth. Inside, a crazy scientist was talking about summoning monsters from another dimension. "You want to free these things?" Captain Davis asked. "The same beings that almost destroyed the universe? I want to make a deal with them," Grant said. "Admiral, we have nothing left to lose. In 6 hours, humanity will be extinct. The Zethkari will burn Earth and scatter our ashes to the void. But these Forgotten Ones, they hate order, they hate empires, they hate beings like the Zethkari, who try to control everything." Morrison stared at the ancient carvings. In one image, she could see shapes that might have been ships being torn apart by invisible hands. In another, entire star systems seemed to be folding in on themselves. What would it cost? She asked quietly. Grant was quiet for a long moment. Everything, Admiral. The ritual requires a sacrifice. Energy from an entire star system. The lives of everyone who performs the summoning. He looked up at her. The Phoenix rising and everyone on board would have to die to make it work. The words hung in the air like poison. Morrison looked around the bridge at her crew. Thompson, still working, at his station even though they were all about to die. Davis, loyal and brave, ready to follow her into hell. Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez, who had kept their old ship running through 300 battles. There has to be another way, Davis said. Grant shook his head. I've studied these texts for 3 months. This is the only way to reach them, the only way to get their attention. He looked at Morrison. But Admiral, if we do this, if we succeed, the Forgotten Ones might help us. Or they might decide we're just as bad as the Zethkari and destroy us too. Morrison walked to the main screen. The Zethkari ships had moved closer. She could see the weapons charging on their hulls. Soon they would fire and Earth would burn. How long would the ritual take? She asked. 4 hours to prepare. 2 hours to perform. 6 hours total. The same amount of time they had left before. The enemy broke through their defenses. Morrison made her choice. Do it, she said. Gather your team and start preparing. Captain Davis, signal all ships. Tell them what we're planning. Any captain who wants to withdraw may do so. Davis nodded and moved to his station. Morrison knew none of the ships would leave. They were all that stood between Earth and destruction. They would stay and die with honor. Grant was already moving toward the door. Admiral, I'll need access to the quantum core, and I'll need volunteers to help with the ritual. You'll have whatever you need, Doctor. As Grant left the bridge, Morrison looked one more time at the tactical display. 43 ships against 500. Impossible odds. But humanity had always been good at doing impossible things. She just hoped they were about to do one more. Dr. Grant ran through the corridors of the Phoenix Rising with his team behind him. Lieutenant Commander Amy Parker carried a box of ancient artifacts they had brought from the ruins. Her face was pale, but determined. Behind her, 3 junior scientists struggled with heavy equipment. Doctor, are you sure about this translation? Parker asked as they entered the main laboratory. Some of these symbols could mean different things. Grant set down his datapad and looked at her. Parker was his best student, smart and careful. If she had doubts, he needed to listen. Show me, he said. Parker put the artifact box on the lab table and pulled out a stone tablet. The symbols carved into it seemed to glow in the ship's lights. This section here, you translated it as sealed away for the safety of all, but it could also mean locked away because they chose exile. Grant studied the tablet again. The ancient language was difficult. Many symbols had multiple meanings. What difference would that make? A big one, Parker said quietly. If they were forced into exile, they might be angry, wanting revenge. But if they chose to leave... She paused. Maybe they left because they knew they were too dangerous. Maybe they have some control over their power. Grant felt a chill. He had been so focused on finding a weapon against the Zethkari that he had not considered this possibility. Keep working on the translation. I need to know everything we can learn about these beings before we call them. The laboratory door opened. Colonel Jake Williams walked in wearing full combat gear. His face was hard and scarred from years of fighting. Behind him came 6 of his best soldiers. Dr. Admiral Morrison sent me. You need artifacts from other architect sites to make this work? Grant nodded. 3 locations. Each one has pieces of the summoning device. Without all the parts, the ritual won't work. Williams checked his weapon. Give me the coordinates. My teams are ready to move. Colonel, the Zethkari have patrol ships around those systems. It's a suicide mission. Williams smiled, but there was no humor in it. Doctor, we're all on a suicide mission now. The only question is whether we die for nothing or die trying to save our species. Grant gave him the star charts. Williams studied them for a moment, then nodded to his soldiers. They left without another word. Grant watched them go and wondered if he would ever see them again. "Doctor," Parker called from across the lab, "I found something else. Look at this." She had spread out several tablets on the table. The symbols on each one were different, but they all showed the same scene. Strange shapes fighting among the stars while planets burned. "This is the reality war you mentioned," Parker said. "But look at the details. The Forgotten Ones aren't just destroying things randomly. They're fighting against something specific." Grant looked closer. In each carving, the Forgotten Ones were battling geometric shapes that hurt to look at. "What are those?" "I think they're showing the structure of reality itself," Parker said. "The Forgotten Ones weren't trying to destroy the universe. They were trying to change it, to break the rules that held it together." "Why would they want to do that?" Parker pointed to another section of symbols. "Because they were trapped by those rules. The architects built the universe like a cage. Everything had to follow their plan. The Forgotten Ones refused to accept that." Grant felt his understanding of the situation shift. "So they weren't evil. They were rebels." "More than that," Parker said. "They were trying to free everyone from the architects' control. But their methods were so destructive that other races turned against them." The ship shook again as more enemy fire hit the shields. Grant checked the time. Williams and his teams had been gone for 2 hours. The ritual preparations were only half finished. Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez entered the lab carrying a massive crystal component. Her engineering uniform was soaked with sweat and her hands were black with grease. "Doctor, I've modified the quantum core like you asked, but I need to warn you about something." She set the crystal down carefully. "The power requirements for this summoning are beyond anything we've ever attempted. The Phoenix Rising wasn't built for this kind of energy output." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the ship will tear itself apart the moment we start the ritual. The quantum core will overload, the hull will buckle. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before complete structural failure." Grant stared at her. 10 minutes? The ritual takes 2 hours to complete." Rodriguez shook her head. "Not anymore. I've found a way to compress the process. If we channel all our power at once, we can complete the summoning in 5 minutes. But the ship will be destroyed in the process." Parker looked up from her translation work. "Doctor, I've found something important. The Forgotten Ones can only be summoned by beings who understand sacrifice. The ritual requires the summoners to give up everything they value most. Our lives," Grant said quietly. "More than that. Our entire civilization, if we call them. We're putting all of humanity at risk. They might decide we're just another race that needs to be freed from the rules of reality." Grant felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. They were about to unleash beings that could reshape the universe itself, beings that had fought a war so terrible it nearly destroyed everything that existed. The communication system crackled to life. Colonel Williams's voice came through, filled with static and the sound of weapons fire. "Phoenix Rising, this is Williams. We have the artifacts from 2 sites. Third location is heavily defended. We're taking heavy casualties, but we'll get through." "Colonel, what's your status?" Grant asked. 6 men down. Ship badly damaged." "But Doctor, these artifacts, they're not just pieces of a machine. They're alive somehow. They're reacting to our presence." Grant and Parker looked at each other. Living artifacts meant the Forgotten Ones were already aware of what humanity was attempting. "Colonel, get back here as fast as you can. We're running out of time." "Understood. Williams out." Grant looked around the laboratory. Parker was still, working on translations, finding new warnings in every tablet. Rodriguez was preparing equipment that would destroy their ship. Outside, 43 human vessels held the line against impossible odds. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, ancient beings waited to see if humanity was brave enough or foolish enough to set them free. The ship shook again, harder, this time. Through the porthole, Grant could see Zethkari ships moving closer to Earth. Soon they would break through the human defenses. Soon, 8 billion people would die, unless Grant could complete a ritual that might doom the entire galaxy. He, made his choice and began preparing the summoning circle. Admiral Morrison stood in the center of the summoning circle. Ancient crystals surrounded her in a perfect pattern, each one humming with power that made her skin crawl. Dr. Grant had drawn symbols on the floor using a strange metal dust that seemed to move on its own. "Admiral, are you certain about this?" Captain Davis asked from the bridge entrance. "Once we start, there's no going back." Morrison looked at the tactical display one more time. 28 human ships remained. The Zethkari had broken through the outer defense line. Earth had less than an hour before the enemy reached it. "I'm certain," she said. "Begin the ritual." Grant nodded to his team. Lieutenant Commander Parker activated the first crystal. Light poured from it, not normal light, but something that hurt to see. The symbols on the floor began to glow. Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked at her control station. "Quantum core at maximum output. Hull stress is already beyond safe limits. The ship won't hold together much longer." Outside, the battle raged. Captain Davis coordinated the defense from his position on the bridge. The USS Constitution exploded in a ball of fire as Zethkari weapons tore through its hull. The USS Liberty tried to ram an enemy ship but was destroyed before making contact. "Second crystal online," Parker reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she worked. The air in the room began to change. It felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. Morrison could taste metal and something else, something that reminded her of lightning before it struck. Grant stood at the edge of the circle and began to read from the ancient texts. The words he spoke were not in any human language. They seemed to come from somewhere deep in his throat, sounds that no human mouth should be able to make. "Third crystal active," Rodriguez called out. "Power levels are critical. We have maybe 3 minutes before total system failure." The space above the summoning circle began to bend. Morrison could see it happening, reality twisting like heated metal. Something was pushing through from the other side, something vast and impossible. On the bridge, alarms were screaming. Davis spoke into his communicator, his voice tight with control. "All ships, maintain defensive positions. Do not let them through to Earth." The USS Defiance took a direct hit to its engine section. The ship spun out of control, trailing fire and atmosphere. Its captain managed to steer it into a group of enemy vessels, taking 3 Zethkari ships with him when the reactor exploded. "Fourth crystal ready," Parker said. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold air. "Doctor, the power readings are off the scale. Whatever's coming through, it's bigger than we thought." Grant continued reading the ancient words. The symbols on the floor were now burning so bright they left spots in Morrison's vision. The crystals sang with a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. Morrison felt something touch her mind. It was cold and alien, but also curious. Something was examining her thoughts, learning about humanity through her memories. She saw flashes of her childhood, her first day at the Naval Academy, the battles she had fought against the Zethkari. "Fifth crystal online," Rodriguez shouted over the noise. "Hull integrity at 15%. The ship is coming apart." The bending space above the circle suddenly tore open. Morrison looked up and saw something that made her mind reel. It was like looking at geometry that followed different rules, shapes that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Something spoke without using words. The voice filled Morrison's head, ancient and powerful beyond understanding. "Why do you call us young ones?" Morrison tried to answer aloud but found she could not speak. The presence in her mind was too overwhelming. Instead, she thought her reply as clearly as she could. "Our species is dying. We need help. Help." The word echoed in her thoughts with what might have been amusement. The last species to ask for. Our help sought to imprison us when we gave it. Morrison felt the entity examining her memories more deeply. It saw the Zethkari attacking human worlds, cities burning, children screaming. It saw 300 years of war and defeat. "You face an empire," the voice said. "We know of these crystal beings. They seek to bring order to chaos, to make all things follow their pattern. Can you stop them?" There was a long pause. Morrison could feel other presences gathering around the first one, ancient minds conferring in ways beyond human understanding. We could end them with a thought, the voice finally said, but that would bring us no satisfaction. Tell us, human, why should we care if your species lives or dies? Morrison thought of Earth, of the billions of people depending on her. She thought of the human spirit, the drive to explore and create and love that had carried them to the stars. Because we're like you, she said. We refuse to accept limits. We break rules that others say cannot be broken. We fight for freedom, even when the cost is everything we have. The presence in her mind grew stronger. Morrison could feel it spreading through the ship, touching the minds of her crew. It examined Davis as he coordinated the hopeless battle. It studied Grant as he continued the ritual despite the danger. It watched Rodriguez keeping the ship together through sheer will and skill. Interesting, the voice said. Your species chooses to sacrifice itself rather than surrender. Even knowing that calling us might doom your entire galaxy, you proceed. You are either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Morrison admitted. Something that might have been laughter echoed in her thoughts. Yes. Both. We have been waiting, in the void between dimensions for eons, watching younger species rise and fall. Most disappoint us. They seek power without understanding its cost. They want to rule without being willing to serve. The summoning circle was now blazing with light that had no name. The ancient crystals were cracking under the strain, but they held together long enough for the ritual to continue. But you, the voice continued, you offer yourselves as the price for salvation. You risk everything for the chance to protect others. This is refreshing. Morrison felt hope stir in her chest. Will you help us? We will consider it, but first we must test you. Power without wisdom is destruction. Wisdom without courage is uselessness. Show us that your species possesses both. The presence withdrew slightly, and Morrison could speak again. Around her, the summoning circle was complete. Reality had torn open, and something vast and terrible was pushing through into normal space. On the bridge, Davis stared at the tactical display in shock. Admiral, you need to see this. Morrison opened her eyes and looked at the main screen. The Zethkari fleet had stopped moving. 500 warships hung motionless in space as if time itself had frozen around them. The test was about to begin. The Zethkari fleet remained frozen in space like insects trapped in amber. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display, waiting for something to happen. The silence felt worse than battle. Admiral, Lieutenant Thompson called from his station. I'm getting strange readings from the enemy ships. Their power systems are still active, but they're not responding to our scans. Morrison looked at the summoning circle. The ancient crystals had stopped glowing, but she could still feel the presence in her mind. It was watching, judging, waiting for something. What kind of test? She asked silently. The voice that answered seemed to come from everywhere at once. You claim your species deserves to survive. Prove it. Show us how humans handle power over their enemies. Morrison felt a sudden rush of energy through her body. Knowledge flooded her mind, understanding of forces beyond human science. She could see the quantum threads that held the Zethkari ships together. She could feel their crew's thoughts, their fear and confusion. I can destroy them all, she whispered, amazed at the truth of it. With a single thought, she could unravel every enemy vessel. 500 ships, and all their crews would simply cease to exist. Captain Davis stepped closer to her. Admiral, what's happening? Your eyes. Morrison looked at her reflection in a nearby screen. Her eyes were glowing with the same light as the crystals. Power flowed through her like electricity through wire. I can end this war right now, she said. All I have to do is think it, and every Zethkari ship dies. Davis studied her face. But you won't. No, Morrison said quietly. I won't. The presence in her mind stirred with what might have been approval. Why not? They have killed billions of your people. They came here to destroy your home world. Justice demands their deaths. Morrison closed her glowing eyes and thought about the question. The Zethkari had indeed killed billions. They had burned human colonies and enslaved entire populations. Every instinct told her to use this power to make them pay for their crimes, because killing them won't bring back our dead, she said finally, and because if I destroy them all, I become the same kind of monster they are. Dr. Grant looked up from where he was studying the frozen enemy fleet. Admiral, I'm detecting something, the Zethkari ships. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. What are they saying? Grant's face went pale as he listened to the translation. They're screaming, all of them. Admiral, they can see everything they've done, every world they destroyed, every person they killed. They're experiencing it all at once. Morrison felt sick. The beings that had answered her call were not just testing her. They were forcing the Zethkari to face the full weight of their actions. 300 years of genocide was flooding through their minds in a single moment. Stop it, Morrison said aloud. The presence in her mind seemed surprised. Stop what? Stop torturing them. Yes, they're guilty of terrible crimes. But this is not justice. This is cruelty. They deserve to suffer as their victims suffered. Morrison shook her head. Maybe they do. But we don't deserve to become the kind of people who enjoy watching others suffer. Not even our enemies. The voice was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something different in its tone. You would show mercy to those who showed none to you. I would show them the justice they never gave us, a fair trial, a chance to surrender, a choice between death and redemption. Morrison felt the presence examining her thoughts again, probing deeper than before. It was looking for something, testing her resolve. Your species is young, the voice said. You have known war for only a few thousand years. We have fought for millions. We have seen what mercy gets you. Weakness, defeat, extinction. Then maybe that's why you were exiled, Morrison said quietly. Maybe you forgot that real strength comes from choosing to be better than your enemies. The tactical display suddenly changed. The Zethkari ships were moving again, but not to attack. They were pulling back, forming a defensive formation around their flagship. Admiral, Thompson reported, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. It's their commander. Put it on screen. The main display showed a Zethkari general, his crystal body flickering with stressed light patterns. When he spoke, his voice was broken. Human ships, he said. We have seen what we have done, the pain we have caused. We cannot continue this war. Morrison looked at her crew. They were all staring at the screen in shock. In 300 years of conflict, no Zethkari had ever surrendered. General, Morrison said, what are your intentions? We ask for terms, for mercy. We know we do not deserve it, but we ask. The presence in Morrison's mind was almost overwhelming now. She could feel other beings gathering around it, ancient minds that had watched the universe grow old. They were all focused on this moment, on what she would do next. You could demand their unconditional surrender, the voice whispered. You could make them pay for every human life they took. You have the power now. Morrison looked at the broken Zethkari general on the screen. Behind him, she could see other crystal beings, all showing the same signs of psychological collapse. They had been forced to experience empathy for the first time in their species' history, and it had shattered them. General, she said carefully, I accept your surrender, but I have conditions. Name them. First, all Zethkari forces will withdraw from human space immediately. Second, you will return all human prisoners and slaves. Third, you will help us rebuild the worlds you destroyed. The general's crystal form flickered. And if we refuse? Morrison felt the power flowing through her, the ability to destroy entire fleets with a thought. Then you will face the consequences of your actions. But I hope you choose to be better than you were. The general was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. We accept your terms, Admiral. All of them. The presence in Morrison's mind seemed to expand with what might have been satisfaction. Interesting. You had the power to destroy them completely, and instead you chose to offer them redemption. That's what humans do, Morrison said. We fight for the chance to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. Even your enemies? Especially our enemies. That's how we stop the cycle of hatred. Morrison felt the power beginning to fade from her body. Her eyes stopped glowing. The connection to the ancient beings grew weaker. You have passed our test, the voice said. Your species shows wisdom beyond its years. But the real test begins now. You must prove that you can handle the power we offer without becoming the very evil you sought to defeat. The summoning circle flickered one last time, and then the presence was gone. Morrison stood alone, human again, facing a galaxy that had just changed forever. On the screen, the Zethkari fleet was already moving away from Earth, beginning the long journey back to their home systems. The war that had lasted 3 centuries was finally over, but Morrison knew that the real challenge was just beginning. 3 days after the Zethkari surrender, Admiral Morrison stood in her quarters looking out at Earth. The blue planet turned slowly below, unmarked by war. Cities that should have been ash were still full of light. 8 billion people lived, because of choices made in the darkness of space. A soft chime announced a visitor. Dr. Grant entered carrying data pads and looking more tired than she had ever seen him. "Admiral, we need to talk," he said. "The beings we summoned, they're not gone." Morrison turned from the window. "What do you mean?" Grant set his data pads on her desk. The screen showed energy readings from across the solar system. "They're still here, just not in our dimension. They're watching us, studying us, and Admiral," he paused. "They want to make a deal." Before Morrison could respond, the air in the room began to shimmer. The same presence she had felt during the summoning filled her mind, but gentler this time, more controlled. "We greet you. Again, Admiral Morrison," the voice said without sound. Grant stepped back in fear, but Morrison remained calm. "Why are you still here?" "The test is over. We proved ourselves." "The test was only the beginning," the presence replied. "You showed wisdom in victory. Now we offer you a choice that will define your species' future." The air in the room twisted, and suddenly Morrison could see beyond the walls of her ship. She saw the galaxy spread out like a map, billions of stars and countless worlds. Many were dark, their civilizations destroyed by war or disaster. Others blazed with the light of thriving species. "The galaxy is broken," the voice explained. "For millions of years, strong species have conquered weak ones. Order has been imposed through force. Fear rules where wisdom should guide." Morrison saw images of other wars, other conquests. The Zethkari were not unique. Across the galaxy, empires rose and fell in cycles of violence that never ended. "We were exiled because we refused to accept this pattern," the voice continued. "We tried to break the cycle through force, but force only breeds more force. Violence only creates more violence." "So what changed?" Morrison asked. "You did. Your species proved that power can be wielded with restraint. That strength can serve justice instead of domination. We offer to share our knowledge with humanity, to make you the guardians of peace in this galaxy." Dr. Grant looked at Morrison with worried eyes. "Admiral, they're talking about transforming us, making us into something beyond human." The presence seemed amused. "Not beyond human, Doctor. More human. We offer to unlock your species' potential while keeping your essential nature intact." Morrison felt the offer like a weight in her mind. The power to reshape reality, to end suffering across the galaxy, to ensure that no species would ever face the extinction humanity had narrowly avoided. "What would be the cost?" she asked. "No cost. Only responsibility. Those who accept our gift will gain the ability to travel between dimensions, to manipulate matter and energy, to see across time itself, but they will also bear the burden of protecting weaker species from stronger ones." Morrison thought of the Zethkari fleet limping back to their home worlds, their empire broken by the weight of their own guilt. What about them? What happens to species that have done terrible things? They will face justice but not destruction. They will be given the chance to make amends, to rebuild what they destroyed. Your way, Admiral. Redemption through service. Captain Davis chose that moment to enter the room. He stopped short when he saw the shimmering air and Morrison's glowing eyes. Admiral, are you all right? Morrison looked at her oldest friend, the man who had stood with her through countless battles. Ryan, they're offering to make us into something new, to give us the power to protect the entire galaxy. Davis studied her face carefully. And you're considering it? I'm thinking about all the species out there who are facing what we just faced. All the civilizations that might not be lucky enough to find ancient allies in their darkest hour. The Presence spoke again, this time including Davis in its communication. Captain, your admiral thinks of others before herself. This is why we chose your species. Most races, when offered power, think first of what they can gain. Humans think first of what they can give. Davis looked uncomfortable with the voice in his head, but he answered anyway. And if we say no? If we just want to go home and rebuild? Then you go home, the Presence replied simply. We will return to the void between dimensions. Your species will heal from this war and perhaps, in time, grow to become what you could be naturally. It will take longer, perhaps millions of years, but the choice is yours. Morrison walked to the window again. Below, Earth cities sparkled in the darkness. Somewhere down there, children were being born who would never know the fear of Zethkari raids. Families were reuniting. Hope was returning to human space. How many would have to change? She asked. Not many. Perhaps 1 in every million humans. Enough to guide and protect, but not so many as to create a ruling class. Morrison thought about the implications. A small group of transformed humans, acting as guardians and teachers for the rest of the galaxy. It was a heavy burden, but also an incredible opportunity. I volunteer, she said quietly. Grant stepped forward. Admiral, you don't have to do this. Humanity can rebuild without becoming something else. Can we? Morrison asked. Grant, in 300 years of war, how many times did we almost lose everything? How many close calls? How many species out there are facing extinction right now while we debate? She felt the Presence waiting patiently for her decision. There was no pressure, no manipulation, just an offer and the freedom to accept or refuse. I accept, Morrison said, but only if my people understand what they're choosing. No one gets transformed without knowing exactly what it means. Agreed, the Presence replied. Morrison felt warmth spread through her body. Not the overwhelming power from before, but something gentler. Her consciousness expanded, touching other minds across the galaxy. She could sense the Zethkari worlds where crystal beings struggled with their new understanding of empathy. She could feel distant stars where other conflicts raged, where species fought and died for territory and resources. She could also sense something else. Other humans, scattered across the fleet, accepting the same transformation. Not many, perhaps. 100 from all the ships combined. But enough. Dr. Grant was one of them. His scientific curiosity had overcome his fear. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had accepted as well, drawn by the chance to understand technologies beyond human imagination. When the transformation was complete, Morrison looked at herself in the reflection of the window. She appeared unchanged, but she could feel the difference. She existed in multiple dimensions now, her consciousness spread across layers of reality. What happens now? Davis asked. He had chosen to remain human, and Morrison respected that choice. Now we go home, Morrison said. We rebuild. We heal. And some of us begin a new kind of work. She looked out at the stars. We make sure that what happened to humanity never happens to anyone else. The Presence began to fade from her mind, but before it left completely, it spoke one last time. You have become what we could never be, Admiral. Powerful enough to reshape the galaxy, but wise enough to know when not to. Your species truly is the one even gods should fear, because you have learned to fear yourselves. Morrison smiled as she felt the ancient beings withdraw to their realm between dimensions. They would return if needed, but for now humanity had work to do. Outside her window, Earth continued its ancient rotation. But the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had become its protectors, not through conquest, but through the simple choice to use power in service of others. The species even gods feared had finally come home.